There's a story that I have to tell, and the reason it's come to my mind is because you and I just got back from a pretty significant trip around the
Hmm.
world, as it were. We've been traveling, as our patrons know, because they got a Q&A. The bonus episode for last month literally came straight from an Airbnb in Cyprus.
That it did.
And I recorded on my phone. But we do it. We still make sure we get the bonus episodes out for the patrons. So one of the stories of this is having traveled quite a bit with you now. I'm reminded of the first time I ever saw you label
Oh,
materia.
I know exactly where this is going.
All
Yes,
right.
yes, yes,
So,
yes.
the long story short, you were undergoing initiation, and I was there assisting with it. And at one point, you and the other candidates had to gather some materia, which is the topic of this episode. And so, basically, you got your dirt and everything like that, and everyone handed them back in these Ziploc bags. And so there are three bags, right? There's three candidates. And so I'm looking over them and I'm trying to sort them. And the first two, one has initials on it and the other has a name. But I'm trying to like make out what the names are because knowing the names of both of these people, the initials and the full name could be the same thing. Like the initials could be the short form of the name, but they also could be the other name. Like it was just because it gets smudged, right? When you're like
Yeah, yeah.
gathering dirt in the cemetery or whatever, or in crossroads, like things get smudged, especially if you label it right immediately. And then I'm like, okay, well, you know what? I'm gonna deduce it based on the third bag. And the third bag, it says your full name, the full dates, including the year, the time, like literally the actual time, PM, the full
Mhm.
description of what's inside, like an inventory list, as well as the location. And I'm looking at this and I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, oh my God, he literally does work in science. Like, not obviously like
Mhm.
you've mentioned before on the show that you have like a laboratory job, and like this made it click for me. I was like, I need you to label everything that I ever gather.
Even the initiator was like, God damn it.
Literally, yeah. Like, where have you been all our lives? That's really how it went in our trip too, because we gathered,
Mhm.
I think I mentioned on the Instagram, like over 100 hagstones, like dirts from various temples and locations and churches and sacred sites. And more on that will be coming because we're gonna make a bunch of stuff. There's some really interesting charms and talismans and oils that we're gonna be making and putting on the website. But I am really, really excited, not just for with Cutting Command, the blog, in terms of the things that we're putting out, but also in terms of just the breadth of stuff that we've gathered that you're going to make available as materia itself, right? So as like the building blocks of other magic that other people can use.
Mhm.
So that'll be at the end of the episode. So stay tuned for what we're talking about. But for now, please do label. You will thank yourself. You keeping that Sharpie on you, you will be so happy when you don't remember when you eventually all these powders when you put them together go look the same. And
Mhm.
when you know which one is the cursing one and which one is the healing one, and they're both like that off-white color. And you have like not only what it is, but where you made it, or like what the time was, or what the election was, or whatever like that, what the lunar phase was. Like you will not only thank yourself, but you will do Key a solid. So, raise a
Legit.
glass of the finest brandy sours that Cyprus has to offer to
Oh
you,
yeah.
okay? Because that was awesome and I've learned from you.
Hmm. Having, come from a background where part of my job was to go through the freezer archive of an entire genetics facility and sort everything out,
Hmm.
and having to throw away, with the blessing of the PI, tens of thousands of dollars worth of experiments and reagents and just random genetic constructs stored in, glycerol stocks. Label your shit,
Yeah,
because when it's not labeled, it's useless. You don't know
indeed.
what it is. You got to throw it away.
Indeed,
So,
many a witches and many a magicians have experienced this. In fact, some of my close friends even recently have been like, I just moved and I realized like I don't know what some of these things are. And when you're a hoarder like us, you and
mhm.
you every time you see two lizards having sex, you're like, wait 1 second, I want to gather the dirt from underneath you guys. This is gonna be amazing for fertility. you eventually end up with lots and lots of jars and Ziplocs. I think every single pasta jar and jam jar at this point that I've ever used has been converted to some kind of herb or materia gathering
Mhm.
vessel. So without further ado, let's roll the music because we have quite the selection of stories to tell.
Be not alarmed at the frightful howls which you may hear. It's Svinga, and bag it, and specifically always remember to tag it, Key.
Tag it or tag it.
Bring you an episode today. Salt is once again away on a secret mission. He has been involved in some pretty intense sorceress and exorcistic training of late.
Honestly, it's also because I was just talking to him yesterday about this, and he was saying like, "Oh, I'm really glad you two are able to just like continue some of these episodes without me." And I was like, "Sweetie, you single-handedly make the almanac for the patrons possible. Like, and you have the busiest schedule of all of us. Like,
Mhm.
he was also nocturnal, by the way. So as a result, like his night shift stuff and his training and like the very specific regimen of meditations and cultivations he has to do, like." It is not the most conducive to always being around. So as a result, you'll hear sometimes episodes that are just me and Key. But when Salt comes back, like as you know, like he always brings the vengeance. He brings the fire.
He
So
really
we miss
does,
him
yeah.
greatly. But this time we're gonna tackle. I think in some ways it's appropriate that it's you and me because we just came back from the trip. So
Mhm.
not only we're not going to necessarily tell too many stories from the trip because that we're going to save for when we launch some of the products that we're going to be making and some of the charms. But we wanted to talk about really something that came up a lot in Q&As with our patrons and something that came up a lot with our friends who've been messaging us on Discord basically the entire time we've been away, being like, oh, what are you getting? Like, what are you gathering? Right? Because we're all like weird ass sorcerers that are like, oh, we go on vacation. I want to make sure I have dirt, from oh my god. Like it's actually
Yeah,
so
legit.
creepy. It's so creepy. Like I was talking about it with one of my relatives and they were like, "What is in your bag that's so heavy?" Like my uncle was like, "You guys have the heaviest bags. Like what are you carrying in there?" I'm like, "Well, first of all, half of that weight is your rakia that you gave us, and the other half of it
Mm.
is like your jams." My aunts and my grandmothers trying to get Key to take more jam home.
Legit. And they're like, "Oh, you must be hungry on your train ride from redacted location A to redacted location B. Take these baked rolls and 3 jars of jam with you in case you get hungry."
Literally, yeah. Well, welcome to the Balkans. We were in Serbia briefly, and I'm gonna tell you that Key met my family. He accompanied me as a travel companion, and I wanted to obviously have my family, my best friend. But it was so funny, like the amount of times that we were just loaded with this stuff, and I was like, okay, and he was like, it can't be that heavy, and I'm like, you're right. It's mostly hagstones. Like it is a solid 100 hagstones that we've gathered from 3 different countries at this point, and we're on to another. And furthermore, lots of bags of dirt. So, with that said, this has been much requested by our patrons as a materia gathering episode where we talk a little bit about mindsets, stories of gathering various kinds of things, tips and tricks to navigate the world. We had a few questions actually about this in our last bonus episode, the Q&A for September, where we were talking a little bit about strategies for going out and gathering things and kind of what to keep in mind when you're doing so in terms of nourishing the land back. You don't just want to be taking, obviously. You want to make sure you're in a good equilibrium with the places in which you ask to gather some of the vines or the roots or the, various kinds of dirts that we're all prone to collecting. It's important also to not have a materialist mindset in your material collection, which may sound a little funny, but what we mean is it's not just about, oh yeah, if I gather like these things and I put them together in one bag, like it's going to activate this kind of talisman or whatever like that. Like you still have to pray over it. You have to activate it. You have to engage with the actual spirits of the soil, the spirits of the plants, and so on. Like you, that's why I prefer to gather things directly. I still have plenty of dried specimens that I've bartered for, traded, literally bought in some cases. But I still try to do my best to set it over the seals and the vessels of spirits that are frankly way better at this than I am in terms of conjuring those spirits, revivifying it, and there will be like physical, tangible effects too. Like you'll notice the plants become more vibrant, for example. If they're dried, they'll be more warm to the touch, and so on and so forth. And while fresh is always best, it's also important to note that many systems have codified understandings of what it even means to gather materia in terms of like, is it in the morning, is it in the noon, is it the afternoon, is it at night? And the character of the plant, depending on whether it's in the daytime or the nighttime, will change. Or including if it's in a cemetery versus outside of a cemetery, for example. Like in some traditions, every plant that lives in a cemetery belongs to the cemetery spirits. It's not actually belonging to other kingdoms or other lineages of botanical spirits that we otherwise would associate them with.
Also, the manner in which it grows, like, is it coming through concrete? Is it growing on the ground of a hospital? Is it growing on the ground of a church? Is it growing in, wherever, a cemetery, as you just mentioned?
Yeah.
Or, the manner in which it's collected itself being important. Like, do you face the plant as you pick it? Do you face away from it? Do you say an oral
Yes.
charm? Do you say a different oral charm? Do you collect it only on certain feast days? Like all
Exactly.
of these things go into this very complicated umbrella of what is the materia magica that we actually use in the crafting of our craft.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Actually, the whole facing away from the plant is very common in various parts of the Balkans. In which case, like, with which hand do you grab it? And you might think this all sounds kind of convoluted, but it is preserving oral histories of spirit given information for how to make certain things effective, and also knowing that certain spirits live in certain plants that are not just the spirit of the plant itself. And so, when when that particular tree is an umbrella to many different kinds of spirits, you're not just interfacing with that tree's spirit, you're interfacing with all the things that live in its roots and its branches. And they judge you based on certain things, right? So I think it's important to let this not be something, again, that paralyzes anybody from going up, but rather encourages them to really look into the folklore of your area. It's not always so complicated, but depending on the system that you're initiated in or that you're working in, gathering something for a very specific tradition or for a very specific spirit is going to take on a particular character. Where if you just spot something and you just want it and you decide and you happen to have your kit with you, that is it's a different approach, right? Because then you're marking it specifically for something, which also means that you would have to really negotiate with that spirit if you want to use it for something else. So it's good to keep things general, but in some cases spirits want you to go out and very specifically gather things for them. On the trip recently that you and I were on, there were a lot of things that I gathered specifically for a very particular spirit. And there were other times that I go back and gather the exact same thing, like the same basic kind of dirt for a different spirit, and I labeled them separately.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the themes that's going to come up over and over again in this episode is that the particular matrix between magician materia and the methodology in which the materia is gathered by the magician will come up like over and over and over again, because as this kind of exactly highlights, the same thing collected in two different ways makes it almost something entirely different, where like a dirt collected from a particular grave with one prayer set over it demarcates it entirely differently than the same dirt but gathered in a different manner with a different prayer at a different time of day, etc.
Yeah, and it's important to note that this isn't to say that, you might think, well, why don't you just gather everything neutrally and then divide it up once you're home among your spirits? This is simply because sometimes, like, the recipes that spirits give you necessitate gathering things in a very particular way to already mark it for them, because they're coming along with you for the journey. They have to do certain things or barter with the spirits of these places themselves. There's like many reasons why spirits sometimes want these kinds of things, and this is just in our experience has come up quite a few times in various traditions that we've trained in, where it's important to gather things with the intention being for the spirit. And you'd give certain offerings before you head out of your door and do certain things to kind of cleanse off when you return. Not to say again that we have to like do this every single time, but it is good to keep in mind when you're going out. Like, always keep a good generic stock, and you can always doctor to individual purposes later. But make sure you stay abreast of your spirit's expectations for certain things as well, because who knows what, they in particular need you to do in order for them to make good on the pacts that they have with the spirits that you're not aware that, they know in those areas.
I think that's something also really important in this whole materia collection thing, and with materia in general. I might be getting ahead of myself for this. I'm sure we'll come back to it, but the idea that you're collecting a materia might not even be the particular virtue that goes into the talisman at the end. It might be something that your spirits are using to trade for the enchantment or the particular spiritual materia that goes into whatever you're making at the end of the day.
That's a great point. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was just thinking about that too. Is like you never know what they're actually using this to barter for.
Mm-hmm. If your spirit shows up and is like, I need a piece of wood from a lightning struck tree, and you go and get that, you have no idea unless you ask them directly if they're putting that in the talisman for its own virtue, or if they're using that as a very potent bartering chip with maybe the deities that they pray to or a compatriot in a particular pantheon that you have no idea about, to actually trade for this material and put that virtue into the piece of wood that you eventually put back into that talisman.
Absolutely. And that segues really nicely into the first of our stories, which I will preface with a brief prologue of saying your gathering kit, right? Like somebody asked this once in a Q&A. It's worth reiterating in terms of like what is a good everyday kit to have on you, because you never know when you're going to find something really interesting. Like my example of the two lizards mating is something that actually happened, and I was very glad that in my book bag I had my roll of plastic Ziploc bags,
Oh yeah.
my Sharpie, a small trowel. You can get these at like any gardening store, like the little ones, or you can take a spoon with you too. A roll of coins, or a little. I actually keep a little pouch, like a drawstring pouch of coins in the currency of the nation that I'm in. A pack of cigarettes, a lighter or matches if you want to light things there, including incense. But I tend not to travel with incense, or I know some people who do, or candles and stuff like that. But just in case, a water bottle or a little flask or a little one of those like gas station bottles of like vodka, rum, or whatever cologne that you like, spiritual colognes. I have a few friends in the city that always go around with Florida water bottles as an offering. He was like, also make sure to have your flashlight and your invisibility and protection talismans. But I think that comes from like the story. What episode was that we even said it in? Was it number 6 where you were like, oh yeah, I was like hopping fences in a cemetery at midnight and one of the guards chased me around. I think that was episode 6. It was like the scrying one, right? Where we
I
talked
think
about
so,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Where for our cold open, we told the most ridiculous story of my entire magical career.
It is not even close to being the actually most ridiculous story of your career.
That's fair.
I'm sorry. There's no way that you escaping that guard is the most ridiculous story. There crazier things happen on this trip. But anyway, we'll leave that for another time. But yeah, definitely, I think invisibility talismans, some good old Pentacles of Solomon, or some protection when you're out and about and you don't want people looking at you. I usually go collect with a friend of mine locally, or I'll go with Salt. So it's one of those things of like, you could just casually talk to them and like, oh, whoops, I'm checking Google Maps. Whoopsie daisy, I bent down and gathered something. I'm tying my shoelace and someone is standing perpendicular to me. If you are anxious about people looking, but most times if people do notice that I'm gathering something, I just stare back. Like I'm like, yeah, and
y'all got any crystal?
Oh my god, yeah. Once okay. Fuck. God damn it. Okay, yeah. So once this was not even on the list of stories to tell today, but whatever. So once Key and I were gathering, we walked by this church, right? And we noticed that there was some very funny materia on the church, and we were like, oh shit, like I I want to get this. It was literally like on the dirt, and we were like, oh great, this is so creepy, but we gotta do this. Like this particular thing at the church, like it's perfect.
That was it was just sitting there too, like on the ground. We're like, we gotta grab that shit.
Yeah, and I'm censoring what it was because of a spirit, not because it's inappropriate, but because of what the spirit did with it later on. But anyway, we gathered there, and this woman comes up to us and asks Key and I if we have any crystal. And we had
crystal meth.
Yeah, not like amethysts. And we very politely say we don't. And she's like, oh, that's okay, sweetie. Like she was very nice. She was like, no, I understand. All right. And then she just walked off. And like He and I just looked at each other and we're just like, listen, she couldn't have come at a better time
Hmm.
because this was the we were literally gathering spicy materia as someone left at a church, which made it spicier. And she asked us if we had any rose quartz, you know. Okay, that was not the first example that I was gonna bring up personally, but I do like the got any crystal story made it first. No, the first story
Hmm.
that I wanted to tell was the freaking murder dirt.
Oh yes. Oh
Because I
yes.
wanted to talk a little bit about examples of having gathered materia and what are some of the tips and tricks that we kept in mind, or what are some of the spiritual, uh, kind of understandings underpinning our pacts with our courts that we had in mind when going out and doing this. And this is a key story because, of course, it is, right? And this was when he messaged us at the end of the day, being like, "Hey, I got dirt from like a fresh murder, like exactly where it took place." And it has the blood in it, and it was still like not fully dry. And of course, all of us immediately I think he sent us a Snapchat originally. Then we all went on the Discord. We're like, "Fucking tell us, dude. What shenanigans have you gotten up to? You were just sitting in your home, like just chilling on the internet, and suddenly like a bat signal that's actually a barn owl goes into the sky, and like your spirits are like, son, you have work to do."
Yeah, legit. Like you have a mission to go on. Much like the graveyard story, they're like complete the mission.
Yeah. So the mission was you want to tell this one?
Yeah, so the TLDR, redacting where I actually got this tip from. I received a tip that a very public murder had occurred in the city where I live. Like broad daylight, people were posting security camera footage of the murder occurring to show the exact location. Like it was some pretty gruesome shit. Like frankly, it was pretty bad. That said, I'm a magician.
Amen, brother.
So what I end up doing is I'm like, hey, what's the vibe with this? And my spirits are like, get that and use it forever in all the Malefica or like spicier talismans you will ever use. And I'm
Hmm.
like, you got it. So I go to the site and I'm like, fuck, where is it? So I have my phone out. I'm like geolocating the exact site of like the event.
And this was the
And I'm
same day
like,
that it happened, right? So like it was still
yes.
it was like blocked off with police tape, but it wasn't like dry.
And the police had like vacated, so I could just like walk in there and do whatever. But the vibe, I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Like, why can't I find it? So I do a particular set of charms to conjure a flock of birds, and they come down and land and start pecking at the dirt where the blood of the victim is. And I'm like, thanks, guys. I whip out the spoon of art and the Ziploc bag of art, and hop down and collect all the materia. Yeah, so that's how we came to be in possession of this particular stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting as well in this case, like, yeah, the body was moved, and this was obviously a very hot site in terms of like the spirits were heated, the ground had literally just been fed, a real tragedy. And so in addition to wanting to show your respect to the victim, leaving the offering there, you also had to restrain the actual material. Like when you brought it home, you said that
Mhm.
you felt like, it was prone to agitation and prone to, there was like random things happening that were kind of inconvenient and so on. Like you felt emotionally off. So you had to do a few things with some of your spirits to kind of cool it down and leave it in the care of more stable spirits to kind of like keep it on
Mhm.
hold for when you would actually need to use it for. And not just like, there's a lot of times when you might need like dirt from a police officer or dirt from someone who was murdered violently or dirt from somebody who died very young, in different kinds of workings. But in this case, like a fresh murder is quite volatile. And so it's storing it safely was something that you kind of gave us a bit of a lesson in actually.
Yeah, like when I brought it back, there was, poltergeist activity occurring, like my emotional state was entirely fucked up in the way that like the energy of the event was kind of sitting on my shoulders very heavily and like, having to clean off in this way. I ended up taking all of the materia and wrapping it in layers of these kind of parchment talismans that I'm pretty fond of making.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we could put some photos up for the Patreon or on whatever social media or on the site, but these like parchment talismans made to contain the material to disperse the heat, going to different cooling spirits and lords of the dead and various traditions in which we hold initiations and being like, hey, can you hold this for me, and keeping it in the shrine that contains those spirits, and just settling it down without disseminating its virtue too much. I think there's a fine line between like, am I doing an exorcism over the soil to completely remove the spirit, or am I pacifying and containing it to make it safe to work with and be
Yeah.
able to draw that virtue out in the future?
That's
Because
a really good point.
I think that's a really critical distinction, because like anyone worth their salt can be like, oh, here's dirt from like where a murder happened. Let me like move the spirit out of that. But the idea of like, okay, how do I deal with the spirit and pacify it and make pacts with it while simultaneously cooling it down and making it containable is something to work out with your spirits. To anyone listening, I implore you to learn how to do that in whatever way is most familiar. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also includes for other kinds of volatile dirts, like for the moth talismans that you'll be, well, they're not really talismans, but they are in soul fetishes, really,
Yeah.
that you've made over a year now, I think, that you've been putting the enchantments into them. And they all sold,
Mhm.
by the way. Like, they're basically like, this is one
Yeah.
of the things that like you didn't want to advertise publicly, so they only went to people that we know that you actually trust on a genuine level to be able to work with them. Like, this isn't somebody who's just going to collect something because it's
Right.
interesting magically, but like someone who's actually a sufficiently well practiced enough witch or sorcerer who's able to actually command these spirits and understand how to work with them when they're not vampiric. But like they involved quite a lot of dirts of various particular kinds of restless dead that
Mhm.
needed to be kept in a very particular way. And these like when you made like the lead crosses that have to go with them, like the actual crosses themselves, which were made of lead, were like bleeding. Like they actually, this wasn't like
Yeah.
you cut yourself and then the drops went on. This wasn't like we have pictures, of
Mhm.
the keys pictures of this happening, and this happened multiple times too. It wasn't just once. Like, and it wasn't like a condensation that happened to look reddish. It was like there was actual blood stains from the crosses and on the snow when you first started doing this in the winter. So it's one of those things that like you really need to contain them in order to not make your apartment insane more than it already is. And I think that was really so. Ask your spirits directly and ask your initiators and mentors what are the protocols for keeping some of these things safe, because having human parts, for example, like restless dead, there are traditions such as in various Buddhist lineages where having a fragment of someone's skull or having a full skull, for example, like malas made out of kapala fragments and so on, these have been prayed over and have been enchanted in such a way that not only is the soul of the person to whom they belonged elevated, and in fact they are safe to work with, but the individuals whose bodies make up the amulet, for example, were themselves monks or were themselves priests. So it's a different
Mhm.
kind of materia. Same thing, but on the other hand, like if you buy Thai amulets, for example, that have necromantic materia, they've also been charged and blessed and enchanted in very specific ways that even if it is like, let's say, a woman who died tragically while she was pregnant, and therefore she's a particular kind of ghost that might be worked in an amulet, like not only is her spirit being elevated by being worked and it's accumulating merits and meta and so on, but likewise, you yourself can assist them in various ways. But the person who made it, like the Ajarn or who has ensorcelled the amulet, is already the person who took care of that side of it. And so, like, if there are other tips on how to like not offend the spirit, if you get this from a reputable amulet seller or actually, in best case scenario, from a temple yourself, like you'll be told how to do this, how to take care of it. Whereas, if you're just getting human parts from taxidermy shops or from markets and so on, where, if you know a guy who knows a guy, you can get sort of things like
Mhm.
none of this has taken place. Like no one has actually done anything to them. So it's up to you to make sure that you have the ability to contain these things, because having too many human remains in your home, you can start sleepwalking, you can have really bad dreams, the spirits of the bones may try and possess you. So you need to really be careful and know which of your spirits you've put as like the guardian who will take these materia or these fragments of of individuals and like keep them in their care and protect them? Like, do you have certain purification practices? Maybe in some cases you don't want to purify it, as you know, Kia mentioned, like you don't want the dirt to have anything done to it. You want it to be just as volatile as it's meant to be in order to work for the particular thing that you're doing. But in that case, you need to make sure you contain it in particular ways. So like, is there a box that you've kind of enchanted as a protection field with a Saturnine spirit? You know, is there something there, or like a Lord of Death that you work with that is able to kind of protect you and keep these things contained? Like, do you have a containment device with them? You know, like I have a box in particular is what that's why I'm referring to these kinds of chests and so on. But like, you know, I also have floor talismans and traps and so on, and even like I have a length of rope that I've enchanted in this way that doesn't ever see sunlight. So I don't think you've actually seen it physically, Key, whenever you've been over. But like, I take it out and I wrap it around things like that, and it keeps it contained until I have to use it.
Yeah, definitely. You know, like I think one of the key takeaways of all this is there's more than one way to skin a cat, or in this case, you know, contain spirits that are otherwise pretty hostile due to the nature of their becoming disincarnate spirits. So it's just figuring out methods in which to contain these things and work with them in the way that's most conducive. So yeah, just be smart about it.
Yeah, and you know, checking with your spirits as to what is the best way you can honor the spirit of the person or persons whom you're gathering their graveyard dirt from. Is it just a matter of leaving a coin and a cigarette, or is it a matter of something else? Should you say a mass for them, like if it's a very particularly powerful spirit that you need to gather, or if it's lots and lots and lots of individuals that are shared in a class, like let's say many different soldiers or many different priests, like what is the way in which you know, you keep these things separate? Like, do you want them all together? Is it okay to mix? Should they be kept separate and then added later on? These are all things to ask your spirits. I like to keep things separate and replenish. So for example, like the jar that I have that is like a certain number of priests, at this point it's way more than that number. It's just that I've like added things. So like, you know, let's say I'm running low on that. Like if I add 7 more priests in like larger quantities and I mix it all together, it basically kind of cuts it together to be a greater quantity.
Mhm.
So, and in that case, I literally keep it with like a cross over it, you know, like a rosary. And usually, if I'm going to go out and work with those spirits in particular, I will go to mass beforehand. And because most of them are Catholic, I'll go to Catholic mass, even though I'm Orthodox. But you know, if I were in an Orthodox cemetery, obviously that would be a little bit different.
Mhm. Or like, you know, in the case of a jar of dirt with 77 priests in it, saying having said over that jar, you know, 77 Hail Marys, 77 Our Fathers, 77
Mm-hmm.
Glory Bees, then going to the grave of the archbishop that's buried next to all those priests, leaving a bunch of offerings, being like, give me your dispatch to, you know, have the permission to bring these guys with me and give their virtue to these dirts.
Yeah.
And it's the whole process.
Yeah, precisely. And speaking of the process, sometimes your spirits ask you for something and you're like, oh, this particular animal, no problem. There's got to be many taxidermy stores that are going to sell me a wet specimen or just the parts that I need or whatever. True story from this year. And then nobody does. Like, it's apparently not only is this not an animal that people typically keep because it's very small and like taxidermists typically don't necessarily work with it, but it's also kind of rare. I have to censor the the name of the animal just because of, you know, some people I think like if they hear it and they know, like you'll know if you know what you know, like you'll be able
Yeah.
to very quickly infer what's going on. But suffice to say, like I needed a very particular animal and I was kind of like fucked up by how hard it was to find this. Like I couldn't believe that like my usual routes of going to taxidermy shops or calling taxidermists were exhausted. And I just want to make a quick note about taxidermy shops. There have been times when I've needed animals or parts of birds of prey that are notoriously difficult to obtain via legal means and are also very difficult to like obtain just out in the wild because they're quite rare. So I've actually called shops. This is a tip that I obtained from a very good friend of mine who she does this all the time and she's even more of a wizard about this than I am, frankly, because like she will go out and like actively not just like message taxidermists individually, but she'll join like millions of Facebook groups and forums where people like trade taxidermy and so on. But even and then she'll be like, "Oh, I found like this wolf pup, you know, or I found like this like baby tiger from a zoo." And I'm like, "What the hell, woman? Like where are you? And she'll just send me the links and stuff like that. So the problem is that she keeps trying to bait me into spending all my life savings on like really cool rare animal materia that I don't need and my spirits don't want, but I would totally, if I had it, I would do so much with it. So then I start like weighing my options and I act like a hoarder. And anyway, so I tried to follow in her footsteps and basically call people directly and be like, hey, you don't have this on your website, but if you find a specimen of this particular species and it's not ideal, like it's kind of broken or was run over by a car, or it's not pretty enough to like make it to a taxidermy specimen, could you sell it to me for cheaper? And this happened once where I needed a particular bird of prey that is really not easy to find. And I messaged her about it, and she messaged a taxidermist who happened to have basically a bad specimen, like a pretty broke. I imagine it was run over by a car of this bird of prey, and he was looking to get rid of it. So he sent it, he sent her like the wings and the feet, and I specifically needed just the feet, but I took all of it in the end, and it was still moist, so I ended up drying it myself down with salt and baking it and stuff like that. But like literally, like this was like fresh out of his fridge, so I was really, really happy. And that like literally happened in one day of me deciding I needed this. And now it's, I still have some parts of it that I'm using for other things. So that worked out really well. But I tried to go that route. I tried to message taxidermists. I tried to go on those forums and those Facebook groups and stuff like that. Nothing. Like this particular animal I needed, nobody had it. And the funny thing is, it's like there was one in my neighborhood and it was one that my friend saw, and she was like, "I'll practice the evil eye on it," and I'm like, "No, I don't want like a slain by magic version of this. That's literally gonna curse the thing that I'm trying to use this for. That's such a bad idea. Like, no." And then of course like my own like family thought of the same thing, and they're like, "What if you just evil eye the one that's in our neighborhood?" I'm like, "I'm not gonna psychically kill this animal because that seems to curse it. Like, why is everyone in my life saying I should just evil eye one anyway?" No, do not do that. But I was like 2 seconds away from getting a slingshot.
Yeah, right.
Like loading with a hagstone and just being like, "Bye, I'm sorry. Like I need you."
Yeah, pull out the fucking, shotgun and be like, "I'm sorry, my friend."
I know. Listen, it was so bad. Like literally, we I know we get a little crazy on this show sometimes, but like this is just like the average life of a sorcerer sometimes. Like you
Mhm.
you just need dumb shit. And so anyway, I like months were passing and I did not have my specimen. And the day that I needed it for the election, as it were, was really coming up. So I started to sweat a little bit. So I was like, okay, listen, I made a petition to the spirit who needs it. And I was like, you help me get it, okay? Like if your spirits ask you for rare materia, just always tell them like, okay, but you gotta help. Like I can't just pull this out of thin air. Like you need to go and help yourself. Okay. Like this is self-serve. Like you got to bring it
Right.
to my doorstep and bring it to me cheaply, conveniently, without making a dent in my budget, in a way that is in a way that will allow me to actually give you this thing because you need it. And I know magically the logic behind why you need this animal. It makes a lot of sense to me. But you and I got to work together. So I said to the spirit one key thing, which was it doesn't have to come to me directly. It can come to one of my friends, and I named individual people that I trust to gather this for me with like the cunning and the ability to actually harvest them appropriately. Like to one of these people or to me, whatever is the easiest and most efficient way to open that road. And if it's to me directly, then great. Let me stumble upon it. Like let me suddenly feel like I have to go to I don't know, the gym or the grocery store on this day, and I happen to find it on the side. Whatever you need. Maybe it's the one in my neighborhood. It'll just you'll keel over one day. But like help me find it. And so about a week or so, maybe like a week or 2 weeks after I made this petition, he sends me the sweatiest Snapchat of all time of him being like, guess what? Because you were on your way to the gym and you saw something in your rearview mirror.
I was like, wait a minute.
And it was that animal, like it was literally already dead. Like you didn't run it over,
Mhm.
like it was already there. So you like park in the middle of nowhere and like run out and grab it and put it in your back seat, and you still go to the gym.
Yeah, it's like it's sweating in the back of my car,
Yeah, it was a hot day too. And then you come back and you show it to me, and I'm like, it's perfect. It's exactly what I need. I need two things from it specifically. And you cut out those two things and you mailed it to me, and it was great. I
Yeah.
put it in the industrial powdering machine and spun it real good, and it became a powder, and it was included, and it was amazing. So I think do you still have the rest of it in your freezer?
I do, yes. It's wrapped up in the freezer because I happen to want the other parts of this animal for similar purposes, you know.
Yeah, well, there you have it. So, for those of you lucky enough to have two freezers, in your McMansion in which you live, it's good to have a second freezer for your animal stuff that's again labeled in
Yeah.
plastic bags separately. And if you don't, then just keep it slightly away from your your frozen dumplings.
Yeah. That was such a funny animal to have to get. Because like I think at that point all of us were doing juju just to be like, you know, God, Buddha, you know, any
Somebody,
spirit,
Archangel
someone.
Gabriel, like
You
doing the
know,
PGM litany to be like, here's a list of the Olympic gods and a bunch of Egyptian ones too, please.
there were probably 5 or 6 people at that point doing that, being like, anyone who can get it, get it.
Yeah, and also that just is also a proof of how I have great friends. Because I was like, hey, 6 sorcerers who were recently hanging out with me in person, who all crashed in my house. Salt and I really need you to do something for me. Like I need to, and it's funny, I keep referring to it as the animal, which sounds kind of creepy, but like, obviously since I can't say what it is, all I'll say is it's a small like animal, right? And it's not
Yeah.
like it's uncommon, but it's not like out of this world or just not ordinary. We weren't like hunting nutrias or something. This wasn't like a pelican, like it was just straight up like a
A guy.
creature. Yeah, it's just a little guy, and
Yeah.
thankfully you found one there, and that was beautiful. And I got it with time to spare, and I really appreciate you for being the gym rat that you are, because since you go every day, you were bound to come across it at some point.
One of the other places I was looking for this animal, by the way, is scientific supply companies.
You were the one who turned me onto this, because when I was doing Oracle Chronos, I think we mentioned this in the post, but like the backup idea, if I couldn't find a cat heart, was like, well, I could order a cat specimen to dissect, which is what they use to train people in labs. And I could just take its heart out and like send it to you. And it almost came to it, but thankfully I did happen to find on a taxidermy website that someone was selling a cat heart that was preserved in formalin.
Mhm. Also, a pro tip to all of our listeners: don't burn formalin hearts,
I
or
was listen.
formalin preserved specimens. Um,
I understand. I understand. I wasn't gonna do it. I was just
yeah,
curious if I was asking you, what would the
yeah, yeah,
dangers be if I just dry this out on paper towel and put it on a charcoal disc? And you were like, no. So thank you for extracting the formalin out. That was much
Mhm.
appreciated. So if you buy wet specimens, yeah, be very careful. The Oracle Chrono specifically states that you should burn the cat heart with the horse manure. Yeah, that smells really good, by the way. And the Greek sage, which did not help, by the way. So if you're doing Oracle Chronos and you got your cat heart, just make sure it's obviously been treated for formalin before you burn it. And it is an outdoor ritual, so it's better than indoors, but it's still good to kind of like be careful. The horse manure was, by the way, like not even the least disgusting thing I've had to gather from Magic. I just had like a plastic glove, and I went to a farm and took a pinch of like a dung pile that I saw where the horses were. And like, it didn't need to be a lot, right? But like nobody saw me do it, and like, who cares? It's one of those things that like I'm like willing to do pretty much anything for Magic. So like if you're like, oh, get this gross thing, I'm like, yes, sir, what time? But at the same like, but yeah, it was still not pleasant. We'll put it that way. This is one of the things that I appreciate about this podcast, by the way, is because the post that I wrote, and this is just a habit that all three of us have, is like was written very formally, and I meant every word. You know what I mean? Like that is my writing style. Like I can be a very serious person when I'm talking about like the sheer love that I have for ritual, or how excited I was that I was able to accomplish this to the letter of what the PGM says.
Mhm.
But when we're actually talking about it afterwards, like in our server, like we're just kind of goofballs about it. Like you kind of have to have a sense of humor when you're gathering horse manure, though.
Yeah, definitely. Or like, if you do the classic hoodoo technique of like, how do you give someone erectile dysfunction? You get a cucumber hollowed out, put cat shit, dog shit in there.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah. I've seen that like recipe on so many different like root work websites and books and so on, including I think it was Miss Ada's book on like separation or divorce magic, the one that got
mhm.
published, the Kimojo. I'll put the actual name of the book in the show notes for our patrons, but like I think it's by Miss Ada. It's the hoodoo separation one. It's the one with like the yellow cover with the scissors.
Yeah,
Yeah. That one has a few like kill his dick, kill her pussy type workings that
yeah.
include putting a lot of it's there we go. I found that it's destroying relationships. Hoodoo spells to break up, separate, hotfoot, and drive off your foes and rivals by Miss Ada. It's published by Lucky Mojo. That one has a few of those, and it does involve you know using the animal feces. So there you go. It's not just Oracle of Kronos. Sometimes you got to collect it, which is easy if you have pets. So
For
whatever.
real, yeah.
Yeah, if you have
So
like a black cat and you need black cat hair, God bless the people in my life who have black cats because they just like mail me the hair. They're like, you can have it for free. Like if they shed every day, like their whole body weight in hair, you can just have it. Oh yeah, and that's the other
so
thing too, is like one of our friends has a friend who is a vet assistant. So when it comes to black cat or black dog blood, like black dog blood was used in the Polanus of Tianus serving woman because that
mhm.
had to be used to mark the sigils on the head of the donkey. Like she was able to get somebody to extract it for us safely with the correct training so that the animal wouldn't be hurt and they were under anyway. So it's not something that we can ask them to do anytime for us, but if they happen to have a patient like that in and they have a friend who's a creepy magician who needs it.
And then we were able to get the I ended up messaging like a donkey farmer and was like, yo, can I get a skull from you? And they were like, say no more. And
Yeah, like they
sent
were
me
like,
a
say no more,
skull.
fam. Yeah, exactly. So there you go. Don't be afraid to message people for weird shit. I've been to many taxidermy stores where I'm like, this is being used for magic, but like, what actually who is the average person besides like collectors that buy this stuff? And they would usually say actually cosplayers. People buy furs and animal parts to make cosplays and costumes and so on, as well as like set design stuff. So like it's never weird if you want to message someone for very particular parts. Like don't ever feel like you're the weirdest person to ask about it. Try be a little shameless, but be polite. So yeah, scientific supply companies, oddity shops and vendors, taxidermy places, as well as individual taxidermists that you can ask them, like, do you happen to have this specimen that's kind of like broken or shitty? I just need the feet, I just need the wings, I just need a beak, whatever it is that you need. And literally asking your spirits, like, hey, you want this, and I'm having a hard time getting it. You got to pitch in. And extend your that's the major tip that I want to take away from that story, by the way, is like extend your radius, like make it so that they don't have to just necessarily come to you, like they can come, like it can find its way to you through other people that you trust. And in this particular sense, I named people, but you don't necessarily have to. Like, it's because of what it was for that I needed it to be really people I trust to gather it safely and appropriately. But in this case, like in some other situations, it could be from anybody. Like, I'll just like message one of my servers and be like, anyone got like 8 archbishops or something, or like, and then I was like, well, I got 2. It's like, okay, great, can you mail me those and I'll mail you some of this, and then like eventually people send me things that I have 8. Although that's a weird example because I can obviously get that locally if you
Mhm.
live close to like major religious cemeteries, but still, it is what it is. I think a good thing to mention as well is when it comes to spirits keeping you kind of replenished on your needs, it's good to look for things that are common needs for most of your magic. We've mentioned a few times that I'm a bit of a magnet for hagstones. So I simply by walking around, I will find them. It doesn't have to be at a beach
Mhm.
either. I've found them in gravel. I've found them in forests. Like, I will, when there's a will, there's a way. And I need them. I need lots of them. I need lots of them as snake vertebrae for a lot of my witchcraft. So as a result, like there are things that I have to do that require specific numbers of them and specific numbers of holes. So that's one of those things that like I recommend keeping that ahead of time. And I mentioned in our Hagstone episode that sometimes I will go on Etsy and buy out the ones that have particular numbers of holes. So, if you're
Mhm.
the kind of person who sells a bunch of hagstones from Jerusalem or from Ireland, and you get orders and you get like someone with like a name that's like I don't even use my own name on Etsy, but like I use a fake name, but like someone with a very particular Slavic name hits you up and it's just like, hey man, like, do you have 8 holes? Like, they have ones with like 7 or 8 holes, and you'll be like, huh? Like that's probably me. But there's also things that I ask my spirits to kind of keep me replenished on. There's certain animal bones that I try and keep on hand because my spirits use them a lot for divination, and they're kind of like single use only, so I keep them around. I have pacts with local land spirits to bring me very particular things. So birds' nests, I will usually get a fair number of them every year that will fall out of their trees when the birds fly off. So, because I don't want to obviously steal one from the actual animals themselves when they're using them. In other cases, wasp hives and bees hives. Anytime, around actually this time of year into fall, like I usually walk a certain route through a forest and I'll come back with about 7 or 8. And I put it in my wasp nest jar and I use that for all kinds of other rituals for your usual hot foot genre of things, right? and
Mhm.
various kinds of protections and so on. Same thing with a few different kinds of ingredients, but also I would say that one thing I really keep my eye out for is fertility things. So in one particular case, rabbit's nests, or this year I found like a little tiny, like freshly born rabbit near my house, and I couldn't find the mom and I couldn't find the nest. So I asked one of my spirits to help me find out where he came from, and I ended up helping kind of guide him back to his nest because I think he just kind of like wiggled his way out. And later on, that same buddy grew up. Like I saw him when he was a bit older, and then I saw him actually just yesterday. I was at the grocery store and I came back and it was the same bunny because he was hanging on the same area, that same nest. And he has a very distinctive marking on his head, so I always know it's him. And he's like almost like an adult now. Like he was born very recently, right? And because I kind of helped him, ever since then, I noticed that I keep finding like tons and tons and tons of robin shells and various other kinds of like eggshells that are really good for fertility. And I gather the dirt from the nest without disturbing it, which is obviously rabbit nest dirt, really, really good for fertility. And since I do things for fertility of the land and for the weather, and sometimes even individual friends who I want to help conceive and so on, like this is one of those situations where like that's a really good thing to have. And there's a lot of spirits that find that deal with fertility very directly. So it's one of those things that, since I have a pretty robust weather practice of keeping the areas in which I live and guard free of bad weather and making sure the crops grow literally when it comes to a farm that I help out with and so on, like this is a thing that it's good for me to have on hand.
Yeah, definitely. Like some of the, similar things in my books, like there's a particular spirit that I have an arrangement with where one cigarette equals one animal part that I need. That shows up on a rock on a river in a particular part of the city in which I live.
I love that. I
Um,
remember you were telling me how this is a section that I really want to make sure we hit on today, which is spirit markets, right? Like
mhm,
spirits who themselves are merchants and who bring you rare things or who can exchange things. So sometimes I'll be like, there's one that I work with and I know where he is. Like he has like a very particular, like a better term, portal that he comes out of in a particular place in my city. And when I go to him, there's another version of a very similar spirit that lives in a cemetery, but he only deals with necromantic stuff. But either way, like I'll go to one of them and I'll be like, here's this hagstone, here's this piece of gold, here's this quartz, here's this something, here's this much money, here's this pack of
mhm.
cigarettes. Can you bring me this thing? And he'll be like 3 weeks, or he'll be like half a moon phase. And I'll be like, okay. And I'll come back and it will be around there. Like it may not always be literally on a rock, for example, but it'll be nearby. Or it'll make its way to me. So which feels a little bit like Spirit Amazon, because it does kind of come to your house. Or it'll come to your neighborhood at the very least. Like you will find it at some point. But what I really like about your situation with your particular spirit vendor is that you have a very particular system with him. It's one cigarette equals one thing, and that thing will manifest on the rock where you left a cigarette, which is really, really fucking cool.
Mhm. And it was really interesting too because this is just like a guy that I happened upon.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like I,
You
I
weren't
was
looking for him.
mhm. I was far from the first person to be trading tobacco for parts with this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like he had been around,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, damn, like lucky find. And he's like, I have wares if you have tobacco.
Yeah, literally, Khajiit does have wares,
Hmm.
and you do have coin. So good.
But yeah, like even asking your particular spirits, be like, hey, where do you do business? Can you show me where that is so I can go there and do that myself?
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of going down that route to like find these particular spirits out in the world where you can actually strike these barters effectively
Mm-hmm.
is a very 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 useful thing to have.
Legit. Yeah. I really appreciate you bringing this up because that's been a huge thing that I really want to communicate to our listeners is if you're in an area where you kind of struggle to find certain things that you need, one is always to know, like, do you really need all this rare fancy stuff? Do your spirits need it, or are you just kind of collecting? In my case, I can genuinely say both. Like sometimes my spirits want this stuff because they know I can get it. But if I was living in an area where that would be really difficult, or if I didn't have the networks that I do, would they ask for it necessarily? Maybe not, but they would ask for the things they would push me to gather things locally, right? either way. But I also collect things just because, to be honest. Like I definitely am the kind of person where, if it's along the way and I notice it and I don't need it for 5 years, but that one time a spirit asks for it, I happen to have it on hand, which has happened multiple times at this point. That something I gathered ages ago becomes relevant suddenly, and I actually forgot that I even had it. Like that kind of thing is something that comes up quite a lot. So don't feel like you need to have the most stocked apothecary in the world to do magic. Like you can make miracles happen with one white candle and one glass of water. And I really stand by that. I've seen it myself. This is not to say that, more rare materia equals more power or something like that. This is not a kind of like points game system. It's simply a matter of what do your spirits want? What would help them barter more efficiently with other spirits? What can be added later? So like if you're out of time, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but if you're out of time and you realize that you can't gather all the things that you need for a particular election, well, you can always add it later, right? Unless something is a core integral component, negotiate with spirits. Don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to say, hey, I actually can't make this happen for you. I don't have the money to afford what you're asking me for. So you either need to manifest for me a side job or some kind of side gig, or you need to make the money fall into my hands for some way, or we're not doing this, or help me find this thing for free in a very particular way. So always make sure that your spirits, if they're asking for rare things that or difficult to get things, that they are involved in the process of gathering it. But if it's just a matter of time and effort, so for example, like it will take me some time to gather 77 priests, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
If it's just a matter of time and effort, then that's really on you, and there's no reason not to do it. And in this case, like some of these long, extravagant lists are because of traditions that require high numbers of things. I would say that one common thing from what I know of Thai sorcery, as well as from what I know of necromancy and various other African traditional systems, is that sometimes you have these lists, and these are what spirits expect and want, and it's been codified in their recipe lists, and that's fine. For Kimanda particularly, we've had to gather probably more materia than for most things. And sometimes when it comes to my witchcraft, it's very simple. It's just like these three things spit on in this way and rubbed in this way. And sometimes it's no, do actually get this many hackstones or this many snake vertebrae with these kinds of qualities. And this is because you're making a home for a particular spirit that will be buried or burned, and its ashes will be scattered in particular locations, and you want to go the extra mile for that because these things represent pacts and agreements and treaties that are frankly of a deeper mystery than we are able to understand, because and it's also not meant for us to know the answer to why we need these things, because sometimes it's obvious, but sometimes the spirit's like, well, you shouldn't know everything that goes into here. Like you are meant to forget some of the things that go in, because that way no spirit can search your mind in any way and know the mystery of how this was made. Like there's always something that's hidden from you that belongs only to the spirit that ensouls the vessel, for example.
Yeah, definitely. Like that is a super important point to take away from all this is like, yes, the list can be literally 10,000 different ingredients burnt to ash and could be contained in like a thimble.
Mm-hmm.
But what 1,000 of those 10,000 ingredients are, sometimes you just don't know.
Yeah,
Like
precisely.
us, and this is especially the case in certain initiatic traditions where like if your initiator just gives you a powder and is like put this in the vessel, if you're like what is this and they're like you don't need to know.
And sometimes, like, unless they're the one who made it, like maybe they don't even know.
Hmm.
It's just like it's something they inherited, and that pattern's been nurtured by many successive generations of priests. Or in other cases, there's recipes that you only need to know if you're the one making the vessel. And it's literally not appropriate for you to know unless you're making one, even if you own one. So these are kinds of things that I think is, the mystery of what's inside the charm, for example, it really shouldn't be known to you and should be known to the person that you're giving it to, because you want it so that there is an element of privacy for the spirit, and you want it so that the knowledge of what is in it goes only with the one that is operating it. Because at the end of the day, I've made charms for people where I've actually genuinely forgotten what's inside, and I have a very good memory. But the reason I
Hmm.
forgot it was because the spirit didn't want me to know anymore. It's no longer mine, it's in someone else's hands.
Legit, yeah. Like there are oils that I've made where I'm like I know it's the oil for this spirit. I don't know what's in it. Like I
Mhm.
can
Yeah, yeah,
maybe
yeah.
see what's in there, but like I legitimately can't remember
Yeah,
the list of things that went into this, because it's like you're in that deep a trance and the spirit's like, nah, it's for me to know.
yeah, precisely.
Like as you said, yeah.
So keep your weird shit stocked ahead of time. Bagged and tagged, keyed, right?
Mhm.
Labeled. We mentioned cutting dirts when you need to, which is not like weird, doesn't dilute or anything like that. If you have 77 priests, and you add seven more in great quantities and you mix it all up, it still counts, right? You just add more now. Yeah.
Mhm.
And the other side of it too, I think is longer 77 though. You know? And then there's also, using you can stretch things out. Like oil obviously can always be stretched out and replenished in the mother bottle using actual carrier oils, almond oil, olive oil, and so on. There's like that whole ratio of like holy water to regular water. There's a math to it too, which I
Yeah.
think is why I'm so obsessed with it's no longer in use, but there's a Twitter account at Blagoslovy, which is Orthodox priests blessing things. And it's just Orthodox priests, blessing like a fighter jet or a blimp or like, your timeline, and so on and so forth, because, or like the whole joke of like, what is the AoE of the make holy water spell? Can a
Right.
river become holy water? How much of the ocean could become holy? There is a math to it. Obviously, there's like ways to dilute holy water and stuff, but like I just keep a gigantic bottle of every holy water that I collect, unless I need it to be separate. And I just keep replenishing it. Like when it gets low, I just keep adding more holy water from different churches, usually like seven or nine. I'll just keep adding at a time, and that keeps it all nice and good to go. But with regards to collecting holy water, never be shy about it. Most churches are more than happy to provide. One thing that I really like about many Orthodox churches is that there's not only a tap, but there's usually bottles on deck. Like I've been to many Orthodox churches where they had plastic bottles in a basket or nearby that you could just take and fill. Some of them have their own branded plastic bottles you can take for free. We were at the Chapel of Saint Petka in Kalemegdan in Belgrade, which is right next to the Ružice Church, and they have their own bottles that have an icon of Petka basically stamped on them. And you could just take one; it's already filled. Or you could take an empty one and fill from the tap at the holy spring there that the church was built upon.
There have been churches I've gone to, even in like, the Maronite Catholic Church that's near me. Shout outs to them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I called them up one day. I'm like, hey, can I come grab some holy water? And they're like, yeah, we'll bottle it for you. Just stop by the office. And they gave me
Mm-hmm.
probably a liter of it, and I'm like, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
They're happy to give stuff out. It's usually appropriate to leave like a
A donation.
token donation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I always
Or-
do, yeah.
Mhm.
Like in Serbia, I give like, I usually buy candles at the church, if it's Orthodox, like I'll get like a few beeswax candles and make a prayer to like the dead or the living, depending on which part of the chamber you're in, and head
Mhm.
out and stuff like that. But yeah, Key, you got your firsthand experience of being in Orthodox countries recently. Like we went to like many different Orthodox countries, and like you got to learn the beauty of the beeswax candles
Mhm.
and the ability to just do so much magic in plain sight.
Legit, yeah. I'm like, I'm
Yeah,
starting to see it.
yeah, you're starting to see it. Yeah, yeah. I think speaking of getting a holy water, a good thing to mention is when grimoires say get this blessed by a priest. What does that mean? I know there's plenty of people who will like bring a basket of things to get blessed, and then they will have a mass set over them, and then underneath the basket, like wrapped in layers of cloth, like to make it look like it's kind of like a cushiony thing, like they have the real item that they want. There's one notable example that comes to my mind, which is in the Grimorium Verum. In the True Grimoire, there's the Kabbalah of the Green Butterfly ritual, in which you have to bless the actual green butterfly that you capture in its box, literally, like at a mass. And it
Mhm.
recommends that you just leave it there overnight. Like you go into the church late and you leave it under the pew and you come back for it when everyone's gone after the mass has been said. I've done this. It worked really well. Nobody
Mhm.
noticed it. But in some cases, like I've literally just gone up and been like, "Can I get this blessed, please?" And it's literally been like hidden. Like I've, I think one example in particular is in books when you could kind of hollow them out, and put an
Oh
item inside.
yes, yes, yes,
Yes,
yes.
yes, that has been used once and it worked. But I had like like a leather strip of bound around the book, so like it
Mhm.
wasn't going to be open. I was just like, it's my family's book, whatever. It's a
Yeah.
Bible or whatever, and like it does work. But or go to your friend who has minor orders, or holy orders and have them do
Real.
it. Or if you have holy orders yourself, you can do it.
That's
There's
one of the tricks that I like the most. Or rather, it's not even a trick. It's just you would be surprised at what priests are willing to actually bless on your behalf. Like I've brought some weird shit to one of the churches nearby, and they've been like, "Yeah, sure, whatever."
Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend in America who gets his guns blessed by a priest because his church like notoriously will like bless arms. And I was like, oh my God, the amount of like trolldom you could do with that. Like it's like some good
Yeah,
old
right.
fashioned like Swedish and Norwegian folk charms for like blessed guns and stuff like that. Like that is great.
Hmm. I love that. I also
Mhm.
know some people who do that. Uh,
Well, yeah, I think did you gather your first hackstone at a literal gun range?
yeah, it was at a gun range that I
Well,
was shooting at that morning.
yeah, there you go. Mr. America.
Yeah, right. Getting exercised because I'm American.
You okay? He did get exercise because he's American. That was the literal stated reason why he got exercised. When we were in this one monastery. Anyway, God bless you, Key. Literally.
Mhm. Yeah, that's what that priest did. Oh man.
He like smelled the vampire witch on you and was like, nah.
Yeah. He's like, what's so whack about you? Where are you from? And I'm like, America. He's like, that must be it.
That must be it. It can't be the vampirism or the witchcraft. It has to be the Americans. And you know, and you were like, oh, your exorcism has made me stronger.
Really? I was like, why do my vampires love it? Joke's on you, they're orthodox.
Yeah, because I helped you arrange a few very well-known Orthodox vampire pacts. What did I say in their very first like intro episode? I'm not like the other girls, I'm Orthodox. Like
Yeah,
just
legit.
imagine a dragon with a big beard. That's what I look like in real life.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Key's a barn owl with gigantic muscular wings. And
Mhm.
Salt's like a humongous werewolf creature that is constantly praying for our salvation.
One of the things as well, while we're on the matter of cutting material, is let's say you have a dirt that you want to stretch, right? Like you get the murder blood using things like cornmeal, cornstarch, talcum powder, pemba, wheat flour,
Mhm.
all sorts of shit like that. Salt sometimes, and making it actually go a pretty long way because you mix it up well enough. It's like the particular blood that I collected
Mhm.
was cut into powders like this because I shook it up enough that all the material was like coated.
Yeah.
And just like the note that when you go to a botanica and you see like all those colored powders and shit like that, that is really what this is for. Is like to mix a particular powder into the materia that you already have, or the herbs, or the recipe, or
Yes.
whatever you have going on.
That's a great point because there's so many times people have gone to like various botanicas and been like, what is this like love powder that's just like a red talcum dust or whatever? Like,
Mhm.
what is this? And like some people might mistake it nowadays as that is the love powder, but it's not. Like what the attraction powder that is, that requires red hachette, like you might use that to start. Like it's just the color. And many places in Latin America will start with this and then we'll add hundreds of other like herbs and things and even like sacrifice an animal to it and so on like to make it empowered, but like it starts with the base that gets cut, but it's the equivalent of like an olive oil. It's not itself the actual recipe, like that is just like food coloring or whatever and a powder.
Yeah, exactly. It's a base. It's a
Mhm.
technique.
So we've gone over acquiring materia casually, places to look for, how to be a little shameless and bold, but also, most importantly, respectful to the spirits of the places you're gathering things from. Having good land spirit pacts ahead of time so that you can be brought things as gifts. It's kind of like feeding ravens and corvids. It's just like eventually they bring you cool things and they remember. Corvids have exceptional memory to remember who was mean to them and who was nice to them. So if you continually feed them, and they bring you little shiny things. It's the same thing with lots of different kinds of spirits. It's like good reciprocity is always necessary. And I would say it should be the baseline of good spirit conduct. We talked about spirit markets. Sometimes they overlap with physical buildings, by the way. They're not always in nature. There's a particular mall in my city that has a thriving spirit market. Like every single one of my friends
Mhm.
who works with magic in any degree, I've been like, can you go to this mall in Chinatown and let me know if you see what I see? And they're like, oh my God, like there's so many spirits who just sit there. There's one subway station in particular where two lines intersect that has like a thriving spirit market where like I've left things there and come back and have found it in trash bins or have found it like it feels a little bit like being in a video
Mhm.
game sometimes, because it's just like, wow, like that literally just came into my hands right afterwards. And also noting, what does it mean to feed the city that you're in, to kind of like plug our DKME episode where you mentioned the Hexorian movement, is like, what does it mean to feed the city? What does it mean to be generous to the unhoused, and to be helpful to people who come in and need directions? And when will that be returned to you as well when you pay it forward? And also, when it comes to if you're running out of time and you're not able to do something or gather something for a particular election, see what can be added later. That's one of the beauty of powdering things. So, invest in a good industrial powdering machine. Those grinders that is really good for spices as well as bones and dirt and stuff like that.
Mhm.
See what you can add later. And then if you give it a glug with alcohol, it solidifies into kind of like a cement like paste afterwards, especially once you start cracking eggs into dirt, like it eventually becomes kind of cement like. So see what you can add later on, or what you can just kind of pour into jars and things where spirits are seated in pots. And we've also talked a little bit about just kind of like making sure that you know how to store things appropriately and keeping a good stock of things ahead of time. I think what I wanted to kind of end off on as we because we'll definitely have more episodes like this in terms of like I've noticed that the ones that get the most comments are always the ones that involve our own practical experience and tips. So I'm really glad that you guys enjoy that. And please do keep the suggestions coming from our Patreons, especially. We're always really happy to kind of like workshop ideas that you guys might have. But one thing that I want to sort of note as well is sometimes like it's good to keep track of what is the aftermath of the magic that you've done in a place and how it's changed. In the exorcism episode, this was episode 2,
Mhm.
back in the very beginning of the podcast. In episode 2, we told a story, and of course, this is another key story. But it's one in which you found out that this place you had scried, which you didn't even know like was famous,
Mhm.
where you did your dog exorcism ritual, that this very place was actually on a list of the most haunted places of your city. And it was just one of those great moments where like you're practicing your mediumship. This is an exercise I'm sure that you've like told your students who like go to you for tutoring. And just a quick shout out with cuttingcommand.com. You can go check out in her consultations page. He offers one-on-one coaching on learning to see your spirits, get closer to your court, discover spirits in your court that you may not be aware around, and a regular mentorship, either one-off sessions or entire bundles that you can work out with him in terms of learning how to activate your site and be able to do all the very things that require, because good mediumship is a baseline to a lot of what we're discussing, right, in terms of being able to go
Mhm.
out and find spirits and negotiate with them, know where their markets are, and know where their places of power are. But you were doing one of those exercises yourself, which is just like walking around your city and seeing what you notice. And you found this place that turns out, it was quite literally one of the most haunted places in your city. And you exercised the shit out of it. And very
Mhm.
recently, you and I found out that that place was taken off the list of the most haunted places in your city
For real.
after
Like
your exorcism.
it's like there's a particular local journalism outlet that compiles a list every year of the 10, 11, 12, however many most haunted locations in the city.
Mhm.
And this place had been on it every year up until the most recent one
Mhm.
where it was just removed entirely. And I'm like, oh yeah.
Oh yeah, it's real.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's good to follow up. Kay and I were at a very famous temple to Aphrodite in Cyprus. This is the one in Paphos that is like the most renowned Aphrodite temple in the world, even. And we experienced a very physical manifestation there that the museum guards commented on and told us to our face in English, like, "Oh, you must have been the one that brought this in." Several times, like people commented on this. So it's one of those things of like it's good to kind of like, if that hadn't happened, it would, and we had done something there, I would have been going to follow up to see what would occurred. But in this case, like this was a very, very tangible physical application of this. Is like he exercised the location. It's no longer considered haunted in the same way.
Yeah,
So
right.
you're a real one for that. I would say that well, I can't give away any details about it because without, risking the privacy of the people involved. There's been times when friends of mine have gone and done very similar things, and then in various locations around the city, and then other friends will contact me and be like, "Oh, this person that you don't know who does magic in this city mentioned that they went here and they felt this huge shift, and it was like this, and they accurately described everything we did. And so this person obviously has very good
Mhm.
mediumship if they noticed that. And they were like, they got the impression that it was a witch in the city who did this, but they don't know anyone who's kind of like willing or able to do that kind of thing. Can I? Was it you? And I'm like, sometimes I'm like yes, and sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't know, maybe you know, like, I don't want to. And then, but times that I've been like, yes, so can they meet you and like talk to you about it? And you know, I've made friends that way. So that kind of always feels really cool. Is like when someone has developed their faculties enough to like spot your shit, and then eventually will be like, you literally meet them because they were pinged by by their psychism around the stuff
Mhm.
that you did. And it's also really great because like cemetery graves that I've started to work with very heavily that I found were really interesting, and I was kind of the first person to start working that grave heavily. I'll come back after promoting that to a few people and I'll see like stacks of coins and cigarettes and flowers, and now it's being more well attended by local magicians so practitioners. So yeah, it's a good way to give back to your city, and you know, because you don't just want to be the kind of person who's just taking and taking and taking. You know,
Mhm.
all you ever do is take and take. You know, in terms of materia, you also want to be giving back to the spirits that are nourishing your practice. You know, because it always has to start locally, right? It's like the thing that we always
Mhm.
talk about is like you say you do folk magic, but who's your folk, right? Is it just the books that you read about peoples and places you don't live in, or are you also aware of the land in which you are? You know, and that's also why we advocate learning languages so much, right? Is to show you respect to those spirits, to safeguard the traditions that you now want to integrate yourself into.
Mhm.
So that is a little bit on gathering materia. I think that's a good beginning. We'll definitely have more in the future. But before we head off, Key, I believe you have something to plug.
Yes, I do. So, in speaking of gathering material, one of the techniques that we mentioned as a completely valid way to come across it is to buy it, either from spirits or from people. So, in honor of this episode, and in honor of me wanting to kind of expand the shop through with Cunning Command, I'm gonna open up the Wunderkammer, if you will, uh, the cabinet of curiosities, and
It's
have
your personal
some.
cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
It is. It's my own little glass menagerie.
Mhm.
Um, uh,
Instead of a sleep deprived somnambulist, it's just dirt.
yeah, it's dirt. We'll be putting up some materia as opposed to talismans and vessels and things like that. We've kind of been known for among certain circles on our shop. We're going to open it up to some materia to allow our listeners to get a little creative with it.
Yeah.
So just as a brief selection of things that are going to go up, we got the four evangelist dirt, which is the grave dirt of four archbishops that has been mixed with the ashes of each of the four gospels, like torn out of a Bible. Dirt from the graves of 77 priests, dirt from the graves of 77 nuns, from seven central crosses of cemeteries, seven Catholic churches, nine Catholic churches, bunch of different holy waters, salt from seven bars, that type of deal. And then there are some things I want to tease that will be forthcoming as they are made because they actually take some time to cook. Unluck powder, which is at this
Yeah, that's
point,
unluck, by the way, not luck. It's
yeah,
unluck.
yeah. So don't put this on your own shit. Throw this at other people's doors and things like that. Um, which allegedly throw it at people's doors. I can neither confirm nor deny this is the powder you throw at the door. But it's an arbitrarily large number of losing lottery tickets that I've either found or been given by friends or have bought myself with the intention of not dressing myself with my expedite oils and losing, all burnt to ashes and then mixed into a carrier powder with a bunch of other bullshit and buried in the graves of people who died of lightning strikes and all sorts of nonsense like that. Certain alchemical pigments that I've synthesized over the years using recipes as close to, if not identical to, techniques dating back as far as like the second and third century AD. Copper pigment that I kind of workshop the development of that as it precipitates out a solution, purifies itself because the other product of the double replacement reaction is a component of natron. And then alchemically synthesized natron from that very product will also be up in the shop. Just it's the winter, so it takes a minute to dry.
Mhm.
So as soon as it dries, it'll go up. Yeah, so that's the teaser, the Materia
And
teaser.
honestly, it's awesome because I think that we've had people be like, "Hey, I really like the way that you guys make your talismans, or like the way you make your charms. I like to make something similar, but I just need some time to gather things." So, that's a great way to kind of shortcut it as well, is
Mhm.
offering some actual fun dirt and other things, and much more to come. We'll have one-off sales every now and then, but like you and I and Salt never wanted to have like a store yet. We wanted to kind of just have one-off runs of things because we're
Mhm.
all busy with our day jobs as well. But in time, an apothecary may form, and then we'll see what happens. For now, though, I would say keep your eyes peeled because a lot is coming. We're working on some really cool stuff from things we've got on the trip, which is why you've been so vague about it. But you'll see plenty of fun things. A whole Aphrodite series is coming. And
Mhm.
also plenty of other interesting bits and bobs that we've gathered along our road trips, as well as really interesting like raw techniques that we're going to be sharing soon as well. So thank you
Mhm.
as always so much for listening. Thank you for all the people who send in amazing comments, whether it's to our Patreon or through Instagram. At Dragon Cutting, that's my personal Instagram. It's what I use to advertise the show. For all your feedback, it's really, really helpful. It means a lot. And we're so glad to see everyone really enjoying the episodes that are more personal like this, that just involve us kind of like laughing and talking about the absurdity of being, which is frankly in in the modern day and age, and all the good shit that we get up to. So huge thank you to everybody. You can always follow us on twitter.com/frightful howls, and you can support us on patreon.com/the frightful howls, Salt's monthly almanac that will help you plan your entire month's worth of juju and spirit interactions. Our bonus episodes, which are our Q&As every month, an hour of extra content where you can ask us directly and we can tell you all kinds of stories and give advice and so on, as well as elucidate on any of the episodes. You get our show notes, get the ability to suggest episodes, and you get all the fun little extra plant lore that comes with the almanac, and much more. So stay tuned. Check us out as well if you're interested in divination services. I do Balkan Fabomancy or bean readings on withguidingcommand.com. He does his wonderful coaching, and Salt does his astrology. So if you're interested in getting the best ever astrological reading of your life, if I do say so for myself, in terms of a good old horary or advice and so on and so forth, you can definitely go to Salt. And if you want to learn how to do all this stuff yourself, go to Key. And me, I just look at beans.
Just look at beans, aka be able to read anyone's life with a degree of accuracy that few other diviners dream to come close to.
Shut up. No. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. And I do love what I do. And I really love helping bring people to closer contact with their spirits. Because I specialize in a lot of in spirit bonds as well, and remediation. So with that said, our Akashic record. Mine is Graves by Whiskey Shivers, because all I could think about when we were talking about like gathering dirt was the "who's gonna dig these graves" line. Like and also somebody help me dig these graves. I can't do it on my own because that is literally Keith and Salt. Like that's down to me. Is like we go together and we come back with bags, and or in the case of our trip, just to our Airbnbs with bags. And you were the muscular pack mule named Parsippany. Because like I wouldn't even bother to bring my backpack sometimes. Like so we were just like shoving it on your which you had like the bag of holding that included the offerings and the everything, tobacco, and yeah. It was great. We went on an island at one point, not like Cyprus, the island. We were on an island of a different country, and we just walked around at night. And we were gonna go to this one cemetery that's like a Catholic cemetery, and we took the wrong turn through a tennis court and found like an ancient Roman cemetery instead.
Oh my
That just
god,
happened
yeah.
to be there, and we found hagstones there too. It was great. So that was worth the 9 p.m. wandering around the island for.
Shoulder deep in different
Yeah,
monuments, like
literally.
fishing
Yeah, yeah,
things
yeah, yeah.
out.
Yeah, and then this one spirit showed up and yelled at me his like full, incredibly long Latin name and was like, "Get me off this island. I cannot cross the sea of the dead." And I kind of checked my spirits and was like, "What do you guys think?" And they were like, "Why not?" And so yeah, we literally helped him off to the
Brought him
mainland.
with.
Yeah, we brought him with. So there you go. What's your Koch record?
So I have an Akashic record that will possibly unlock some hidden memories in our listeners, which is Silver and Gold by Burl Ives, which is popularized by the
Rudolph the
Rudolph the
Red-Nosed
Red-Nosed
Reindeer.
Reindeer.
Oh my God, what a
Yeah.
what a throwback. You know, how do you measure its worth? Just by the pleasure it gives here on Earth, silver and gold.
Precisely the one.
Yeah.
Silver and gold, silver and gold. Everyone wishes for silver and gold.
You are the treasure hunter that, you like Faust in his grave somewhere in hell, smiling happily upon you,
Yeah,
trained to
right.
Mephistopheles for, your continued advocacy of Germanic treasure hunting traditions.
Finding gold on the beach. And,
You literally actually found real gold on the beach and gave it to one of my spirits who then ate it because it's gone. Like I've looked everywhere. I've looked in all my luggage. It is nowhere. Like that spirit actually did eat it. Yeah.
it's the
Gold
inverse
here.
of Four Ears Five Eyes, who's eating coals to shit
Produce,
gold.
yeah, yeah, yeah. In this case, it's
It's
eating
eat-
gold to produce the coolest effects you ever see in your life.
Mhm. So speaking of Faust, today's license to depart comes from Faust.
Mm-hmm.
Good old, Alvarez through Anodia Press. Shoutouts to him for doing these translations into English of these Faustian texts. And, very importantly, not being afraid to share sources and publishing the original German source text
Mm-hmm.
to do our own translations of as German speakers.
Mm-hmm.
But the one I wanted to bring to everyone today is from the Key to Necromancy, Volume 2, Chapter 4, A Proved Experiment on How to Raise a Treasure, specifically subsection number 1, which is called The Demand.
The demand. All right, hit us with the demand.
I demand you, hidden treasure and goods, and request you through the highest names of Tetragrammaton, Jehovah, Agla, and also by the strongest living and true God, who created the heaven and the earth, together with all the creatures, that you open the hidden treasure and goods to me, insert name here, and that you show me your rightful substance, as you have expelled through the sun or moon, and through the diligent hands of the men placed buried here.